Hi there, my name's Wilson. I'm here to talk about self doubt and imposter syndrome. Let's start by looking at what exactly is imposter syndrome. In simple terms, it is an insecurity where you don't feel like you deserve it, despite anything good in your life. You feel like you are only getting that because you are faking it and that you will soon be found out by your peers or by your colleagues, and that is imposter syndrome. No matter what is your education, accomplishments, successes, what you've done that looks like it's going in the right direction, you basically can't feel happy about it. So, why do I want to talk about this? Personally, I've been feeling this way ever since grad school, and I wasn't able to pin down exactly what it was until I came across this word a couple months ago. It's partly because I chose a less typical path to entry into design, and it leads me to feel somehow less credible and worthy. It is great relief just knowing I'm not alone in feeling this. So I just want to take this opportunity to open up the conversation, and I think it particularly matters to us graduate design students at our center as I explain why that is the case. Imposter syndrome isn't a new phenomenon. It was originally coined in the 1970s by two women clinical psychologists, Suzanne Imes and Pauline Clance. During the time, the term was called imposter phenomenon, and it's later evolved into the imposter syndrome that we know today. So maybe you've heard of this word before and you've never seen yourself as an imposter, but here's a fun fact. According to Journal of Behavioral Science, it is estimated that 75% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And here's another fact: 82% of industry professionals report having self doubt or personal incompetence. Interestingly, some of the most talented, brilliant, successful people like Tom Hanks, Maya Angelou's, Howard Schultz, who's the former CEO of Starbucks, etc., had gone through the same insecure feeling. Even Albert Einstein was one of them, too. The term was coined in the 1970s at the same time when he used to write his journals. Lastly, Debbie Millman, former president of AIGA, who's one of the most influential designers of today, has also suffered from imposter syndrome. So you might wonder, is creative industry by its nature a breeding ground for insecurities? Or in other words, does imposter syndrome have its roots planted in the design community? Having this question in mind, I interviewed Drew Littlewood, who's a New York based graphic designer, art director, and adjunct professor. He runs the independent studio Graphic Support Group, co hosts the podcast Graphic Support Group. Here are some highlights from our chat, and let's take a look.
Like, I feel like as designers, a lot of the time, we're
Mm-hmm.
expected to just like kind of have answers and provide a specific service, like sort of have a process that we do like we have everything figured out. So like as a designer, this is how we operate. This is if you came to me as a client, I would give you like exactly what you needed. And it's a service, right? So in that respect,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it's somewhat creative, which requires vulnerability and requires a sort of nuanced conversation to happen between two people, the client and the designer. In order to have a good conversation, there needs to be a level of connection between people. And I feel like when you're talking about service, it can kind of like remove that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, oh, I don't want to know like how you're feeling, or I don't want to know like, you don't go to a doctor asking like how the doctor's doing, right? Like the doctor's there to like treat you, right? So as a designer, sometimes I feel like my job is to take whatever the problem that this person is having, diagnose it and solve it. But I need their help to do that too. So I think it's just letting people kind of be themselves and be vulnerable with each other across like all the different sides of design and that can allow for better connections and better work to come out. I think when there's this pressure for everything to be perfect and for the designer to come up with the perfect answer, the perfect solution completely on their own, like after one meeting with the client, like that to me is actually like a big problem.
He also touched upon the importance of having a positive mindset in a wholesome environment, which is crucial to all good work.
Yeah. I also think it's like one thing I talked about. I did like a workshop about like using design as like a therapeutic opportunity.
Hmm.
And it's also just like when what you're making feels good to work on, the work will always be better in some respect, right? Like if a pro I always hated the idea that like you would look at a final piece of design and it would be perfect and amazing, and then you'd think about how painful it was to work on it. Like think about all the people involved and how stressed out they made each other and how they were up all night for like 3 weeks. Like that idea to me doesn't, I don't want to like behold something that required pain to achieve.
Mm.
And so I think it's also like making sure that you are like approaching the work from a positive perspective. You are like trying to be calm and like not rush through things and give yourself enough time and make sure that you don't like you're not over ambitious and setting yourself up for failure because that's where all the stress comes from. But if you're like, all right, like I'm in a clean office, there's like nice tea next to me, there's like a candle lit and like I have this music on and like I'm gonna do one page at a time, like of this book, and I'm gonna enjoy each page, you know? I think that's how you have to do it because otherwise you're just gonna lose it. Um, and if you have a team, I think it's important that the team recognizes like the need for a level of like comfort and compassion and sort of understanding from one another.
Another interesting point he makes during our interview is that we're all in some ways role playing when we assume a certain work title.
Like you're literally performing a role. You
Yeah.
are not the job.
Mm.
You are a fit for the role. And the role is whatever the thing is. So it's like the role is I am the social media designer. And then you try to perform that role as best you can. Uh, it could be a good fit, or you could not be the right person for the role. So I
Mm.
think it's like separating yourself from the role, first of all, and
Mm.
also recognizing that it is a role. Like we're all performing a role. Like nobody's born as like, I'm a graphic designer. It's
Yeah.
like, no, I'm trying to be a graphic designer by the standards and the descriptions and the way that that has become defined by society or this industry or whatever, whatever.
Mm.
So that's liberating in the sense that, like, yeah, it is a performance because it's not real. Being a graphic designer is not a real thing. It's something that we determined.
We're trained to be.
Yeah, and also it's not science. It's not being a doctor or being something where you need like specific credibility to pass specific tests. Like it is a fluid, open dialogue. Like what is a graphic designer in 2024? It's also very different from what it was in 2015, which is like 9 years ago. Like it's kind of changed completely. Like there's so many different ways to do that and to be that. So I think a lot of it has to do with comparison. A lot of it has to do with insecurity. And a lot of it has to do with like not recognizing the fact that it isn't that like the rubric for comparison, for like, am I meeting the standards of this role that I've chosen? I think that's sort of can be irrelevant because the role can mean so many different things.
I also asked him, do you think designers are prone to be affected by negative thoughts compared to other fields? And this is what he answered.
I wouldn't say necessarily, although I would say that because it's a visual medium and there is so much sharing of the work itself, like directly onto Instagram or onto these social media platforms, it can become like really overwhelming. I think any visual form that's like a lot of the way that people are now sharing their work is through these digital like media, social media, and just kind of constantly being like thrown at like your face. Like you're just like constantly looking at work and it's all very good. I mean, there's clearly some bad work too, but most of it is pretty good. Like there are some really talented people making really good work. And I think that you can either be like intimidated and freaked out by that, or you can be like inspired by it. And also just thinking about like what it is you want uh from yourself and not thinking about what you expect from yourself based on what other people are doing, which I know is like the hardest part. But I think every industry has like that level of like, oh, do I have what is the sort of tangible representation of success across these industries? Like, I guess if you're a doctor, it's like awards or like being written up or like having research papers or like they're all every industry has this level of like, do I have
That thing.
enough to show?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think with this, with us, it's like the website and the portfolio is such a big part of it, that it is like, oh, I can just look at like 1,000 websites right now that are way better than mine, and I'll feel like crap about myself. But I don't really know. Yeah, I think that is a big problem, and I think that has a lot to do with again this like posturing, this sort of like I'm perfect, I'm the best. There's nothing like my work is the embodiment of me. I think if you can find a way to express yourself and your work that's true to you, and it's not a painful exercise, it will be the best. So like if your website looks and feels exactly how you feel about yourself and how you want people to see you, then it's successful, even if it doesn't look like somebody else's.
Now that we understand where the insecurities come from, what are some other ways to help us better cope with the situation? As Apple launches Apple Vision Pro, it really drives home the idea of interacting with others in real time in a 3D immersive environment. So, how can Metaverse help designers deal with negative thoughts and feelings? And how can we as designers use Metaverse to help us in terms of our mental well being? I think one of the biggest benefits of Metaverse is that it makes it easier than ever to bond with someone outside of your circle. Designers can form something similar to AIGA in the Metaverse where we find our own support group. Besides, the anonymity of virtual reality can help people feel more confident about sharing personal issues and struggles. And of course, I asked Drew how he thinks Metaverse can help, and this is his take.
I honestly have not thought about the metaverse very much. I think that anything that brings people closer together, even if it's like virtual, like if we could be in a room right now with like 10 other designers on like Google or on Apple Vision and
Mm.
feel like we're like sitting in a room helping support each other, that's great. Like I don't really know what other opportunities exist in the metaverse for design. I guess like studio visits, things like that where you can kind of really get inside somebody else's like experience and learn from them. Like if graphic support group were like virtual interviews with people all over the world and we could like see in their studio and like they could show us more about like how they work, that would be great.
At the end of our interview, I asked Drew what advice would he give to young designers so we can better prevent ourselves from encountering mental distress at work.
Be patient and like take care of yourself and also try to meet as many people as you can that you admire and just hear what they have to say and
Hmm.
try to develop like relationships with people who you admire because you can learn a lot just from like hearing them talk about their experience or usually if they see something in you that they think is like they see like a potential in you, they'll help you to feel like more confident about yourself.
Hmm.
Um, but also just yeah, just keep trying and never think that like you have to be something like you can kind of just slowly build towards your goals. You don't have to do them immediately, and it's going to take time and like things accumulate. Like if you're constantly just trying hard to do the best work you can and trying to keep yourself healthy mentally and physically, and you know that you want to grow as a designer, you will. Like you, if you don't want to grow and you think you're great and you're pretending you're like a genius designer, even though you're just out of college, people aren't going to necessarily like respond that well to that. And also you probably won't feel very good because you're kind of hiding your insecurities or or if you're not insecure, usually that's an issue. Like you should be a little bit insecure as like a
Yeah.
human being, you know? So I
Yeah.
think like just knowing that like it's normal to be insecure, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to seek out people who you want to get advice from. And if you're trying to improve, that means you're doing something right because that means you want to be better.
Lastly, I want you to remember that we're getting an MFA, a terminal degree in design at our center. We're automatically put on par with all the great minds that came before us, and we're surrounded by talented creatives that are willing to do the hard work. It is 100% natural to be insecure and feel inadequate. MFA represents a high standard, and it means we're leveling up. We're crossing a chasm, and we're now looking up from the bottom of a new threshold. If you're feeling like an imposter right now, that doesn't mean you're a liar or a fake, and it doesn't mean you should presume more knowledge than you have. It's simply because we're transitioning into a new role. And that marks the end of my talk. If you want to talk more on this topic, feel free to reach out to me. Even though I'm not a psychiatrist or therapist, I'll be more than willing to be a part of your support group. Thank you.